I'm Richard Knowles, and I'd like to welcome you to Module 3 of our course, Leading and Using the Process Enneagram. Before I get into the course, I just want to give a brief review of the course schedule. We are now in Module 3, looking at simple rules and in-depth discussion of the Process Enneagram. Module 4 will take us into case studies. Module 5 will talk about transformation and waking up. In Module 6, which completes the course, we'll talk about creating the safe conditions and partner-centered leadership. In Module 2, you'll remember we talked about leadership and managership. We talked about the history and development of the Process Enneagram and the leadership dance. Remember that leadership and managership are different, complementary, and intertwined. Both are needed, and we need to have a good situational awareness in order to use them properly. Beverly McCarter and Brian White, in their book Leadership in Chaotic Organizations, wrote that the Process Enneagram appears to be the link between complexity theory and practical application when working with groups of people. It's the link between the theory and the practice. Back in 2012, I did some work with Kent Mueller, who's the principal acquisition analyst at Aerospace Systems. He was the senior director. And he says Dick Knowles provides an excellent, fresh perspective on human factors based on real experience, scholarly research, and creative modeling. His insights to organizational change helped out our Aerospace Systems engineering company to experience meteoric growth of 623% in fewer than 5 years. Dick holds the mirror up and challenges leaders and managers to look, assess, create, and implement. If you don't grow, it's your own fault. Here's the agenda for our work in Module 3. I'll talk about using the Process Enneagram using several McDonald's restaurants as examples. None of the information about McDonald's is proprietary. It's the kind of information you would get as you go into different McDonald's restaurants. I'll talk about simple rules, the range of uses of the Process Enneagram, levels of learning, and dialogue. Let's suppose in this story about McDonald's that I want to buy a McDonald's store for my business, and I found one that is not operating very well and is performing quite poorly. My plan would be to buy this store and then transform it into the best store in town. So I'd like to walk you through the process. The first part of it would be looking at this store from the perspective of the 9 points of the Process Enneagram. So I look at who they are, what their intention is, the issues and ambiguities they're struggling with, what the relationships are among the people working in the store, make some supposition about what their principles and standards of behavior are, look at the work they're doing, look at how they create and use information, look at how they learn and create new potential, and look at their context and structure. Context is the outside world, the competition. The structure would be how are they organized inside the organization. So when I look at identity, I know they're in McDonald's. They have the golden arches, and I know that it's a fast food business. The intention of this McDonald's is to sell hamburgers, sell lots of fast food, and make a profit. As I walk into the McDonald's store, though, I notice that there are a number of issues and ambiguities that are not good. The place smells bad. The restrooms are dirty. The clerks are rude. The trash bins are overflowing. The store's floor are dirty. The tables are dirty. Things are not good here. I listen to what's going on and watch and notice that the relationships among the workers is quite tense. The clerks are waiting around to be told what to do. And there's some sharp comments among them. There doesn't seem to be a very good level of trust among them. And so I suppose that the principles they're operating from are to stand around and wait until you're told what to do. Do as little as you can. Ignore the public as much as you can because the public creates work. And you don't clean up the restrooms on schedules because that's not a very pleasant piece of work. It's one that's needed, but it's not pleasant. I can run through those points within the first minute or so that I walk into the McDonald's. I look at what they're doing, and they're preparing fast food for sales. They're waiting on customers, and they're doing some housekeeping work like cleaning up the trash and cleaning the restrooms, but only when they have to. I notice that their information is shared with a menu on the wall above the heads of the clerks. They use touchscreen ordering systems. They do some buddy training. They're talking to each other, they're asking questions among each other. And they have some standardized forms to fill out. Their learning that takes place after I've looked there and talked with people for a while is buddy training. They assign a new employee in with a more experienced employee to learn how to do things. The manager spends a lot of time giving orders. They're trying to work out ways to deal with customer complaints, and they're not being very successful at it. They do look a little bit at competition, but not a whole lot. They're pretty inwardly focused, waiting around to be told what to do. The outside world in which they live is one where people want quality, fair prices, and cleanliness. And the outside world is highly competitive. They might have Kentucky Fried Chicken down the street and a Chick-fil-A a little bit later and a Burger King. The outside competition is there and it's fierce and it's trying to pull their customers away. And this store is not doing well because the picture that we see here is one that's not very good. Inside the store, there's the top-down management. The manager's telling people what to do. They're standing around and waiting for him to do that. And when they get busy, chaos reigns. Everything's all over the place. The manager's trying to jump from one spot to another. The people aren't taking initiative to do things, and it becomes quite difficult. So have a picture now, using the Process Enneagram model, just part of it, to see who and what they are. And you can see that that restaurant is not doing well, primarily because the things on the right side are not good. And these things on the right side govern how the people work. And that shows up on the left-hand side. So now I've decided to buy the restaurant. And if I can, I will take all the employees with me since they know the place. And I'll sit down with them and talk with them about how do we want to be in the future, and let's create the best McDonald's in town. And so, using the Process Enneagram, I begin again. We look at the new identity, the intention, but then we move to principles and standards, and then back to the issues and ambiguities. And then we look at the relationships. So we've changed the order in which we're looking at these things. We're going to look at the context of the outside world and how they're structured internally, and at the work, and learning and potential, and information. So we're going to look at this, creating this new McDonald's restaurant using the same kinds of areas to look at, but we're going to look at these in a different order. To begin with, everyone will know it's the McDonald's because there's the golden arches and they know that we serve fast food. But they also going to know that we have a great team of people working here. And I talk with the people who've come who want to be the employees and say, is that what you want? Was that what you like that? And our intention will be to sell hamburgers and fast food and make a profit. But I'd also like to have a small scholarship program to help those of you who want to go to the community college with some of your tuition payments. And we want to be the best fast food place in town. If we're going to do that, we're going to have to work with these kinds of principles and standards. And we talk about what do we need to do, and we co-create. The different ones begin to make contributions. Our fast food service must be consistent, customer-focused. The restrooms need to be clean. We need to be a team. We need to listen and share and learn to grow together, help each other, and share information. We can't have any harassment or bullying. It's going to be out of bounds. So we need a safe place to work, both physically and psychologically. And we have to cover for each other. And when we make mistakes, we need to apologize and learn from them and get better. So as we talk together where we want to be the best store in town, these are the ways by which we agree to work together in order for that to happen. And when we work that way and then we begin to address the issues and ambiguities, we stay on top of the competition and get better and better. We have a high-quality restaurant with great food, great service, clean restrooms, clean facilities. We're doing all this together as teams, each of us taking part and sharing and learning and taking the initiative to begin to do some of these things without having to be told all the time. And as we work this way, we become a team. We become more customer-focused and friendly, and trust and interdependence build. So these things all happen as we begin to work together with our co-created principles and standards. We then look at how we're going to be organized, and inside we're going to have a team-based system. We're going to have team leaders and workers, and sometimes these may change around a bit. And we're going to have a supportive manager. The manager won't be running around issuing orders, but rather going around checking with people, sharing information, offering help. How can we get better? The outside world is just like it was for the old store. People want quality, fair prices, and cleanliness. And it's a competitive market. There's other stores that are still out there. And then we're going to begin to work together, making and selling fast food like we did before, waiting on customers, keeping the facility clean, emptying trash, cleaning the tables. We'll all be doing that in a proactive way. The place will be clean, it will smell good, the customers will feel good and welcomed when they come in. And then we talk about learning it. And we're going to have some team meetings. And there's going to be team training. We're going to work on how do we deal with complaints, because there may be some that come. We're going to study the competition and see what they're doing and how we can get better. Maybe they have some good ideas we could use. And we're going to talk together to get better. We're going to use information. We'll have the menus displayed just as before and the touchscreens, but the team leaders and the workers will be talking together, sharing more information, helping each other. And still we'll have standardized forms. And each day we'll go around this sequence, fulfilling our intention with our co-created principles and standards and dealing with the issues as they come, making sure we're organized well, we're doing the work, learning and growing. The leader, the manager of the store, is talking with people about who are we? We're the best in town. How are we doing? Be talking together with the people, with respect and dignity, helping them to see what's going on and building trust in the process, asking allowing them to ask questions, inviting them to ask questions, sharing all kinds of information. How are we doing as a business? What's going on? How's the scholarship program? And so the manager, instead of dealing with the details all the time, is helping people see how their important work is fitting in and making a difference. Doing it in a way that's respectful and building relationships and sharing information with everyone. So this is the process. We now have gone to look at the invisible patterns and processes within the Enneagram. And in doing that, we have transformed the unsatisfactory store into the best store in town. As we go around the perimeter, we can see who and what we are. As we go inside and look at the lines, we see how and why things happen like they do. These interior lines are hidden to most people, but when you begin to see them and begin to use them, it makes a huge difference. And in all of this, the principles and standards that are co-created are the key for the transformation to take place. Now, as people are self-organizing and doing work together, one of the things you have to worry about is that everybody stays focused and aimed pretty much in the same direction. So there has to be some way to hold this all together, and I call that the bowl. The bowl provides order and focus. The Process Enneagram is a meta-model of the natural patterns and processes of self-organization, doing the work, leadership, and transformation. Its use enables people to come together in dialogue to quickly and effectively address questions, solve complex problems, make decisions, organize themselves, and get things done. So it's not only talking together and thinking together, it's doing things together and making things happen. Over my 35 years of using this, it seems as though all human activity follows the Process Enneagram meta-model. I've had people complain to me that they can't make it not work. They've tried to spoil it. They've tried to have it be misused and not accomplish anything, and they can't do that. And that I find kind of interesting and sort of fun for me. Now, the Process Enneagram has a wide range of uses. We can look at the current state, and that's kind of what we did when we took the first look at the poorly performing McDonald's. That was the picture we created. Who and what were they? And we could co-create our future together, which is what we did when we moved from the first McDonald's to the new McDonald's. We can use it when we have a project in front of us. How do we get this particular thing done? How can we move into the future together? You can use it to diagnose problems. So, for example, in the McDonald's examples, if a Tim Horton restaurant all of a sudden showed up across the street, that would be a change in the context. And we'd move from the change, looking at the system, what new issues does that create for us? Do we need any new principles and standards of behavior? What does this do to our intention? So you run the arrows backwards. The new Tim Hortons shows up, and you run the arrows backwards, beginning at 8 and moving backwards. And that helps you to analyze the problem. In creating the Process Enneagram map together with the people, we create the bowl, the container, or the playing field. And we can address any complex problem you may have, help make decisions, and doing the work. And as I said earlier, all human activity follows the processes. So any human activity we have before us is subject to the use of the Process Enneagram if we should choose to do that. Now, all these complex systems that we're talking about have simple rules. Very complex systems are often governed by very simple rules. For example, people who were trying to make computer simulations of flocks of birds and schools of fish tried all kinds of variables to get these images they call boids to move around the screen and look like a flock of birds or a school of fish. And what they found was they had just 3 rules. The boids had to move at about the same speed. They couldn't hit each other, and they moved towards the center of the flock. And when they ran the computer program with those rules, they got amazing simulations of flocks of birds or schools of fish. When I was in Shanghai many years ago, the streets were narrow. They were packed full of people on bicycles, motorcycles, scooters, cars, trucks, carts, all kinds of transportation. And the streets were blocked, just chock full of people. And when it came time to cross the street, I began to think about the simple rules. The simple rule for the traffic was it moved slowly. The streets were congested, at least at that time. People were all moving about in the same direction, and nobody was hitting anybody. And for me, the simple rules to cross the street were to not look anybody in the eye, step slowly into the traffic, and walk slowly through the traffic and across the flow. And it was like walking through a stream of water. The traffic automatically parted as I went through and moved across the street. Very complex situation, yet stepping into it, and it changed. I read an interesting report about a very effective school, and they had 3 rules. Take care of this place, take care of each other, take care of yourself. And a part of the story, the writer was there one day when they had a fire drill. It was a rainy day. And the students and the teachers were all out in the playground area. It was kind of muddy. And when the drill was over, they began to go back into the school. And without anyone saying anything, everyone began to take their shoes off, and they were lined up in pairs along the side of the school on the porch. And everyone went in their stocking feet. They just did that automatically. No one had to say anything. The school stayed perfectly clean. Organizations have simple rules. Share information, build relationships of trust and interdependence, and help everyone to see the importance of their roles. And when we do that, we get very, very high levels of performance. But we can have quite a variety of performance, but as long as it's in the bowl, we're okay. So we can get an enormous diversity of behaviors from these simple rules. So we don't have to make things overly complicated when we're working with complex systems. We can keep things pretty simple. We have to be persistent. We have to keep after things. But as I walked my plant when I was working in the Bell plant in West Virginia, this is what I did. Shared information with the people. How are we doing? What are you doing? They shared information with me. It was a lot of feedback for both sides. I talked with the people. We listened together. I tried to be respectful. Ask them how I can help. Ask them how can I do better. How can we all do better? And in these kind of conversations, we had great diversity, but we also had great levels of improvement taking place. Now, as we work in these complex systems and we're looking and engaged in trying to do new things and make changes for one thing or another, the question is, how do we know whether or not the changes we're making are going to help us to be more sustainable or less sustainable? And I pondered over that for quite a while. And then I came up with thinking about autopoiesis. Now, organizations behave as if they're living systems. And an organization is a complex, adapting, self-organizing network of people. In order to survive, living systems are constantly changing while they're maintaining their identity. And that's called autopoietic. That was developed by Umberto Maturana and Francisco Varela back in the 1980s. So there's an ambiguity in this and paradox, constantly changing while maintaining the identity. So I was thinking about that, and they were talking about living cells. They weren't talking about organizations or people. They were talking about single-cell organisms. And I was thinking about those on an airplane ride one time, and it occurred to me, well, these cells all have a structure. They've got to have flexible roles in the systems where they are. They have to pay attention to the change in the environment. I don't know how they do that, but they can pay attention in some way. They have an impact on their environment as they eat and put waste back into the environment. They have an identity. Somehow they know who they are. And the cells have an ability to learn and adapt somehow or other. That's seen in organisms like slime molds, for example. And so I was thinking about these 6 things, and what do they mean for us if we think about this as an organization? Suppose we could begin to measure each decision when we make the decision, not at the beginning. This would be a leading indicator. And evaluate each decision as to whether they're the decision will help us to be more sustainable or it would make us less sustainable. And so I looked at the ratios again. If a decision we were making made us more emergent and fluid, we were probably more sustainable than if we were becoming more rigid and more hierarchical. We're probably more sustainable if people's roles are flexible rather than rigid. We're probably more sustainable if we value differences and polarities and paradox, rather than trying to suppress these and deny them. We're probably more sustainable if we have a positive impact on the systems in which we're embedded, and probably less sustainable if we're having a negative impact. If we take time to self-reflect and self-remember and learn, we're probably more sustainable than if we're sleepwalking, ignoring, or burying problems. And if we're open to and acting on future possibilities and potential, we're probably more sustainable than if we're closed and indifferent. So we began to look at all these changes we were making as we were trying to manage the plant there in West Virginia and make it better. You remember when I went in there, it was about the poorest performing plant in DuPont, so we had lots of opportunities to make decisions to get better. And we began to look at every decision with respect to these 6 ratios. And we looked at each decision actually in a 3-dimensional way. What impact is this decision going to have on our organizational effectiveness? That is, how are we working together? What impact is this decision going to have on our functional effectiveness? These are the skills and knowledge that we have in the organization. Bringing in a new course would be a functional effectiveness. And what's the impact on our business effectiveness? Are the business results going to get better? And we talked about every decision from these 3 points of view using the 6 ratios. And we said if the change was going to be positive, we'd give it a score of +1. If we didn't think there would be any impact, we'd give it a 0. If we thought there would be a negative impact on sustainability, we'd give it a -1. This was a very simple way for us to measure what was going on. It was very subjective, but we didn't get into big arguments. And I did this with my leadership team at the plant, which was 9 of us working together, talking about these things, seeing what was going on, why. And we developed this metric system. So let me go a little bit further in this example. Let's suppose that the decision we're making is to move to teams across the plant. And looking at the organizational change dimension, this was probably going to have a positive impact on our structures, +1. It's probably have a positive impact on our roles, +1. We would be valuing differences because we have different people coming onto the teams, so that's a +1. As we move into this, it's going to be a negative impact on the systems around us because there's a lot of adjustment. We didn't know whether there'd be any positive or negative impact on our ability to self-reflect and learn, so we gave it a 0. And we thought, well, if we come together in teams and are talking openly together, new possibilities will probably come, so we gave it a +1. So if we add these together, the net score is a +3. Then we did that for the functional effectiveness and the business effectiveness, and then we took the score and added them together. And then we made a chart. This is the chart that we made as we were going. For the changes that we made are shown along the bottom of the chart. You can see at the beginning, back when I first got there in 87, we weren't making many changes. But as we began to move, people began to learn about changes, and you can see that across the bottom of the chart, the number of changes became more and more frequent. And by the time we got out into the end of 1994, we were having so many changes, I was actually having to slow the plant down so we wouldn't outrun our technology. For each change, we do an evaluation and give it a score. And then we'd add that number to the previous number. We did that for each of the 3 dimensions. And so the red line is the organizational effectiveness, the blue line is the functional effectiveness, and the green line is the business effectiveness. And you can see that the organizational effectiveness and functional effectiveness improved faster than business. But at this point, in 1991, the business effectiveness line crossed over and got stronger and stronger and stronger. The functioning effectiveness line kept getting stronger. The organizational effectiveness line kept getting stronger, but at a slower rate. And then at this point, in 1993, the DuPont company started modifying the benefits programs and taking benefits away. And that each of those changes caused us a negative impact on the red line here. And you can see our organizational effectiveness began to deteriorate. So we consciously worked in here, how can we get this thing back onto an upward track? And we found a way to do that. And we began to improve. Now this is all qualitative. These are leading indicators. Are we just blowing smoke, or is there something real to taking a look at that? Well, let's take a look at some quantitative data. This chart shows our total recordable injury rate for the plant from 1983 up until 2006. I came into the plant, and our injury rate was about 5.8. I used hard top-down driven processes, and the rate came down to about 0.7. And I was using the kind of things that Cotter talks about in his book, Leading Change, which he published in 1995. We didn't have his book then, and we didn't do things in the same order exactly, but we did all these kinds of things. And then we went to teams in 1993, and you saw on the chart that I showed you in the previous chart, things began to change there. And when we went to teams, our injury rate dropped from about 0.7 down to about 0.3 or even lower. It was very hard to sustain the rate at 0.7. We were fighting, and it was really tough. When we went to teams, everything began to shift. I could move to becoming a cheerleader rather than a slave driver. And you can see that in about 1992, earnings began to improve, and they went up 300%. Productivity was up 45%, and emissions were down about 87%. When I left the plant in early 96, or 95 rather, the total recordable injury rate stayed very, very low. However, the new plant managers that came in were using the traditional top-down management processes that we'd all learned in DuPont. And things began to fall apart. They weren't talking with the people. They didn't get out of their offices. They didn't know the people. They actually were telling people, we don't need you around here anymore. Some of the best people at the plant were told that they were just a waste and we didn't need them. I wish they'd go away. Unfortunately, things fell apart to the point where in January 2010, they had 2 very serious environmental incidents and a fatality. Now, my chart stops at 2006 for 2 reasons. One is that they changed the way in which they calculated the numbers, and the other was that the business environment changed such that the whole level of activity of the business changed and everything got weird. But you can see here's hard quantitative data that supports the data from the previous chart that was leading indicators and was qualitative. Here's another picture of what was going on. This chart shows the total recordable injury rate for the Bell plant. It's the same data that was in that red chart in the previous. And we went from an injury rate of about 5.8, came down with my top-down process, and it leveled out at about 7. Then we went to teams, and it dropped and stayed down in this range for a long period. I left the plant at about here, but they continued to work this way. They sustained that process. Now, this injury data relates to slips, trips, and falls and ergonomics. Another piece of safety work that we do at the plant is process safety management. That is keeping the chemicals in the darn pipes. This chart shows that performance. And this data is what was in the pollution information report that we gave to the EPA each year. It's the toxic release inventory. And you can see that when I came to the plant, we were putting about 6.5 million pounds of waste to the environment, to the air, the water, and the land. The top-down management process that I used brought us down to about 2,500 to 3 million pounds, or 2.5 million to 3 million pounds. We went to teams and we got better and better and better and better. And by this point, we come down about 95%. Then I left the plant, was transferred. The managers took this process back to themselves. This is a process that's a little more engineering intensive. They had to allocate money and manpower to do the work. They were under severe cost pressure, as I was. And they began to pull people off, maybe take an engineer off of this or one off of that, or we would stretch out the frequency of inspection cycles. So things began to fall apart during this period. But we have 2 different management processes taking place, the one in the first part and the one in the second part. So this process, the top-down management process, is producing clearly poorer results than the partnering leadership process that we were using here with teams. So the quantitative metrics used when the decisions were made were validated by the quantitative metrics of the results that were developed over the subsequent years. We didn't have those hard data for quite a while, but they developed as we went along. Now, another thing I want to talk about is the levels of learning that we need to participate in as we're doing this work, because it changes as we begin to move more and more into using the Process Enneagram tool and learning to live in organizations as complex, adapting, self-organizing networks of people. So I'm going to talk a little bit about single loop learning and double loop learning, which were developed by Chris Argyris back in 1997. And then talk about triple loop learning, which I first read about in 2008. These are levels of learning that we need to use as we get into higher and higher levels, going from simple to complicated to complex problems. So let's take a look at single loop learning. And this is the Deming cycle. Plan, do, act, and check. And it's focused at things, and it works well to help us to develop reliability, predictability, stability, and control, close to the work that's being done. It's a mechanical view of things, but we can maintain control and order in the status quo. And it's a closed boundary. We're all tight in this thing. We're not bringing in information from the outside. And we get into layers and stovepipes. Now, it's good for simple problems and for being close to the physical work. However, we get into situations where the things that we have learned here aren't good enough, and we need to get more information. And we go into double loop learning. And we go out and look for best practices. We go to conferences looking for new ideas and workshops. Read the literature. These are still things-focused activity, but it's a bigger picture. This challenges the status quo. Things aren't going to be quite the same as they were. Learning increases. More information needs to flow in this, and feedback. And the boundary becomes porous because we're going outside of the organization to find the best practices, for example. And this is good for high-performance work teams. It's a more open system. There's more employee involvement. And it can help you get a flatter structure, like a matrix-type structure. This is a good place to be when we're working with complicated problems, the linear, multi-step problems. Again, it's best for the people who are close to the work. Maybe higher level managers can be involved, but still they're not remote from the work. And we get better results when we go to double loop learning. However, when we begin to recognize we're dealing with a complex world, we've got to go to a higher level of learning. This is triple loop learning. We still have the single loop and the double loop in place, but the triple loop begins to bring us into looking at complex systems. We have a porous boundary. We think about a strange attractor. That's the bowl that I talk about. We think about networks. We think about living in ambiguity. We're dealing with dynamic organizations where change is happening all the time, and there's faster learning. Organizations, as I've mentioned, are complex, adapting, self-organizing networks of people. So as we're dealing with complex problems, the leaders need to be moving into triple loop learning and beginning to walk the plant and talk with people and share information so we can get better and better. When we operate this way, we get the best results in the world. We get sustainable results. And we can use partner-centered leadership as we do this work. A few years ago, So what we had done here in Module 3 is I've shared with you the patterns and processes, the hidden patterns and processes that are so important, emphasizing how important it is for the principles and standards to be co-created. Talked about developing the bowl to hold the self-organizing system so it doesn't shatter. We've talked about simple rules and how simple rules can support and guide all sorts of extraordinary behavior. Talked about the uses of the Process Enneagram, the sustainability ratios, and the levels of learning. Coming up in Module 4, I'll share with you a number of case studies where I've used this work in sugar mills, city government, and whatnot. So here's the course schedule again. We've just completed Module 3. Next time we're together, we'll go into Module 4, looking at case studies, and then look at the transformation and waking up in Module 5, and in Module 6, work on creating the safe conditions and partner-centered leadership. Now, before we go into Module 4, I'd like you to consider these questions. What's the purpose of the bowl, and why is it necessary for everyone to understand it? Or you could talk about a playing field, if that's the easier metaphor. The other question is, in thinking about your own organization or one with which you are working, list 4 to 5 recent decisions and evaluate each one using the sustainability ratios. What new insights does this create in you? And for this exercise, just look at the change. I wouldn't necessarily split it into the 3 dimensions that we did. Looking at it from a one-dimensional point of view is also quite useful. So look at that and get some sense to try to internalize these things we were talking about today so they become more a part of you. As I said early on, we're moving into an area of learning to use things and have a sense and build our intuition. So it's not just things in our head, but it's things in our heart as well.